Well, hello. I want to say it's my privilege to be able to walk with you just for a few minutes in discussing what I think is a critical issue. And let me pull this up here, introduce myself. For many of you, you may know me. I am Rob Musick. I am the campus chaplain here at UPike. And for the last, since 1999, one of my big passions has been the exploration of um, religion and human sexuality, particularly the inclusion of persons who identify inside the LGBTQ plus communities. Now, of course, when I started that journey in 1999, I was thrust into a conversation about it because in my religious tradition, I was being trained to be a minister, and they were having all kinds of intense conversations about the inclusion of LGBTQ persons, and people were leaving the church, and some people thought that the ground was going to rip open and swallow people up who were kind of metaphorically that kind of the sky was falling because of this. And I was in a conservative place pushing some ideas a little bit, particularly in my undergraduate school, doing some research and making some arguments. And then I decided to take a more conservative approach, really to kind of fit in and swallow what I really thought, took a conservative approach on the issue until I was 27, but always, I was a closeted believer in the idea of the full inclusion of LGBTQ persons inside of religious leadership. And then at age 27, really, I guess you could say I fully came out as a strong ally. And now here at the university, I'm one of the co-sponsors and the founders of, before it was called Differing Sexualities Alliance, and this inversion of it now, our group on campus is called Pride Plus. So today, without any more, I just want to say that as a strong ally who wears a collar, it's a real privilege to be able to talk to you for a few minutes about LGBTQ plus realities and issues of religion. Down at the bottom here is my contact. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. You can text me, you can call me, email me. Also, you can holler at me on Twitter. Either way, my office is in Armington 460. If you ever want to swing by and say hello. So let's talk real quick about what's going on. Religious issues for gay persons in religious communities, religious families, faith systems. Four really significant things. Number one, the major issue that people are going to wrestle with is the idea of the longing for inclusion. I want to feel like I belong, but my biggest fear is that I will be rejected. And there's nothing like being rejected from the people that we are closest with. Think, the youth leader that you've always gone to church with, to your favorite aunt, to a parent. What do you do with your Southern Baptist father who is a minister in the church and you know that you are gay, or you are inside of a conservative Jewish home and you go to a conservative Jewish school? This could literally mean everyone you know could reject you. One person who anonymously took part in a research study on gay persons inside of religious communities says it really shakes your confidence, because once you lose the support of the people who you think are always going to have your back, it's much harder to believe that strangers are going to have your back, right? So the sense that once I lose support, it really is going to do damage overall to my ability to be able to trust. I think where people see this is the sudden loss when a person decides to come out, right? And we know that There are lots of stories of traumatic experiences of people come out inside of religious communities. Now, some people have great stories of lots of inclusion and acceptance, but a lot do not. And there's a whole host of reasons behind that. But one person says, after about 6 months of visiting, I learned that this inclusion was only so deep. I wasn't going to get the painful messages from the pulpit, but I wasn't going to be fully welcome in the life of the church. So it's this notion that here I am visiting a religious community, and I know that if I come out, support's going to be gone. Now, that's not always true, but many times what a person perceives would become reality, but it's not always true, right? I think that it's important to really do a lot of investigation inside of the community and to find out particular churches, if they've ever had other people to come out or to be identified inside of the Pride Plus community, what has been their experience, because churches are, or religious communities are like people. Sometimes they evolve. Just think about my own journey, right? How I've evolved over time. There are a lot of religious communities that have also evolved. A third thing that is a huge issue is that if you are inside the Pride Plus community and you still have this deep desire, you are inherently religious, you love Jesus, you're Jewish, you know no other way but being a Hindu, and you want to submit to Allah as a Muslim, you may have to find a new community, and that can be incredibly painful. And then I think that the thing that people aren't talking enough about is the trauma of a person who knows their sexuality, but when placing it inside their religious experience, they feel eternally unclean, as if God hates them, and it provokes this horrific, painful self-image. I know that in my 10 years here as campus chaplain, this has been one of the biggest struggles of our students, is that even as I share about biblical passages and religious ways of seeing self as a gay person, that it's okay, that God has made you this way, and that God celebrates you, and that God values committed long-term same-sex partnerships and marriages, that many times students and people cannot get this in their mind because they for so long heard, at least not, even if not overtly, they've heard kind of subtly that God thinks that you're an abomination, that God thinks that you are inherently defiled by your very existence, by your very orientation, by your very sexual desire for same-sex persons, that you are wrong, that it's the ultimate experience of shame, that you by your very makeup are out of bounds, by the very fact of who you are, that you are immoral, and that you by your makeup are damned. This psychological damage and trauma that takes place is the leading reason why people are removing themselves from religious communities. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So then, if we've talked about the kind of the major things that people in the Pride Plus community are going to wrestle with. What do people need, right? And the answer is belonging. Belonging. Because if you go back, right, if you look at this here, it's the fear of rejection, the sudden loss of support, having to find different community, and believing that God has damned you, that God believes that you are wrong. The antidote, or the kind of the solution to that, is belonging, right? And I say this today with the awareness that at least one gay youth between the ages of 13 to 24 will attempt suicide every 45 seconds. So while I shared that last slide, there was a teen, young adult who committed suicide. That's stunning to me, heartbreaking. Dr. Kia Darling Hammond, an expert in the ideas of belonging, she says, belonging, like air, is a fundamental need. Without it, we are susceptible to profound despair. To be othered is to be deprived of belonging to community, to humanity, and even to oneself. Foremost, to protect people's mental health, we must affirm their inherent dignity, humanity, value, and potential. A thriving human has strong community and selfhood, abundance, pleasure, relief, and wholeness. And really, well, she goes on to talk about the idea of intersectionality, right? The idea of multiple senses of identity and how they come together. And rather than looking at it as something that you just like tack on at the end, it is a unique part of who you are. And when you put these different realities together, that you are this beautiful, incredible, unique expression in our world that is to be celebrated and valued and appreciated for who you are. That the truth of the matter is, here at UPike, right, a part of our fundamental mission statement is the belief that everybody has inherent worth. And in that is the notion that as we gather together, whether it's in class, on campus, without you, it's not the same, right? We need each other. I need you, you need me. We need each other together to see the full picture. As if you think about a puzzle, without you, there's absolutely a missing piece because you add a beauty and an insight and a perspective that's needed for this community. You absolutely are fundamentally important to who we are as a community because you matter, right? So you belong. Now, with that, there are some things I'm going to just talk from my particular religious perspective real quick that can help people. Number one, in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, probably one of the most important fundamental truths of the entire Bible is revealed. And it says that humanity is made in the image of God, that each person reveals who God is, right? And that you, right, are made in the image of God. Therefore, all people have inherent worth, value, dignity, and that is, as a part of that is the human sexual experience, right? The human sexual identity. So that is however you are wired or made or designed when it comes to sexuality. It's a part of your unique makeup, and that is a part of God's revelation of the world. Now, later in the New Testament, we will find out that the skies will rip open and Jesus will hear the voice of God. And Jesus says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And this idea that in Christ, we are the beloved of God. You are beloved and loved by God. Also in the Bible, it talks about the fact that God has blessed us. God has blessed us to be a blessing, right? The very gifts that God has given us, God is calling forth for us now to put out into the world. And a part of that is through our sexual identity, right? And inclusion and acceptance of other people. So a couple things I think are very important, and here this may be challenging for some. So I'd encourage you not to stop the presentation, but just to hear me out for a second. Are there gay narratives in the Bible? Are there gay people in the Bible? Not just the people that are condemned, but are there gay stories in the Bible? And queer theologians, queer scholars, look at three particular places in the Bible and say, I want to ask some more questions about this. The first one will be the idea of King David. King David, back in the Old Testament, he's the ideal king of Israel. And he has this very, very, very intimate relationship with a man by the name of Jonathan. And when Jonathan dies, David grieves for Jonathan in using Hebrew language that almost seems to indicate a lover type of relationship. Now, this is a hot take, but there are queer theologians who look at this and say, there's something else more going on than just brotherly love. Again, scholarship is divided on this, but this is a very interesting place to look and to ask some questions. Second narrative in the Bible to ask some questions about is that there is a servant, a Roman centurion, a Roman military leader, has a servant that he is seeking to be healed by Jesus. And many people wonder why in this first century, why would a slave master care this much about his slave to even go to a Jewish teacher like Jesus to find healing, unless this is a sex servant, sex slave, a same-sex slave. Interesting take. We find out Jesus will heal this servant. But finally, I think the one that is most thought-provoking and really asks some questions is in the book of Acts. So the book of Acts is the story of the early Christians right after Jesus's death and resurrection, when Jesus goes off to heaven. How does the church form, and how does Christianity evolve into the world? The book of Acts tells us, as these earliest followers of Jesus are going out and preaching and teaching, one person that they encounter is this Ethiopian eunuch. So someone from Africa who's reading the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, but this person's a eunuch, right? And this person, what I mean by a eunuch is not a term we typically use today. Someone who has something dysfunctional about their, about their sexual organs, someone who's been made a eunuch out of dedication to a leader. They would have been seen as, according to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, they are someone who is seen as a sexual deviant, someone who is out of bounds. A eunuch is somebody who was by very nature seen as defiled in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. New Testament comes along, encounters this Ethiopian eunuch, and he is reading this and doesn't know what he's reading, right? He doesn't know, he's reading the Bible, he doesn't know what he's reading. And one of Jesus's followers teaching him about what he's reading and says, hey, this is about Jesus. And the man says, hey, I want to be baptized. I want to be a follower of Jesus. And as we're reading it, we would think the logical next step would just be to say this, right? Like that, no, you can't, you're a eunuch, you're out of bounds. But that's not what the story does. The story takes a hard turn, and the question is asked, what prevents me from being baptized? And we know what the answer should be, but it doesn't go there. What it says is, do you believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God? And the eunuch says, I do. And he is baptized. Now, why is that so significant? Because he was never asked to change his sexual reality. He was embraced as he was made. To me, this is revolutionary when it comes to how Jesus's followers see those who had been deemed previously sexual deviant. Now, those are some narratives that can be used when you think about human sexuality in the New Testament. So real quick, I want to think about a couple other, let's think about the major world religions, and let's first start with the second largest world religion, and that is Islam. There are over a billion Muslims in the world. Think about places like Indonesia, India, Saudi Arabia, and many Muslims in the United States, and even Muslim students here at UPike. So here's an interesting thing about Islam. Unlike other world religions, there isn't one central governing body, meaning that there isn't like a pope. So it's really not possible to say all Muslims believe this about human sexuality. A lot of that has to do with where a Muslim's from, their nationality, how old they are, what their family has brought them up, the cultural influences. So you're going to find a perspective. Now, the majority of Muslims around the world are going to be very conservative about this issue and believe that human sexuality is that rightful moral human sexuality is expressed between a man and a woman when they are married. But that's not always the case, because there are Muslims in places like the United States, Great Britain, and other places around the world where they are pushing for full inclusion of all people. So I think that for Muslims who embrace those in the Pride Plus community, the issue, the idea of the diversity of creation becomes a huge part of it. And here I have given you a link. I've given you a bunch of links in this presentation, but one of the links is for a young Muslim woman who is seeking to integrate her queer identity and her faith. And it's like 6 or 7 minute video of her journeying with her. What does it mean to be Muslim, and what does it mean to be queer? So I think that's a really helpful video if you're interested in this. It just looks at one person and their particular journey as they wrestle through and kind of the issues that they're wrestling with. Now, if you're interested in kind of the traditional approach to Islam and homosexuality, this short video is about 3 minutes. It's from an imam or a Muslim cleric talking about the traditional approach and how he believes the Quran, or the sacred book of Islam, teaches a more traditional view of human sexuality. Now, if you're interested in this, there are some really great resources for Muslims when it comes to full inclusion and coming home to Islam and the Self, which is a guide, the Mecca Institute, and the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity, and then of course Muslims for Progressive Values. And these are some great websites to check out to learn more about how do persons incorporate or integrate their sexuality and their Muslim commitments, right? Let's talk about one of the larger religions in the world, Judaism, right? Judaism, think the nation of Israel. Again, like Islam, Judaism is a very, very diverse religion. It has conservative branches. So think Orthodox Judaism, kind of the black hats, the little, kind of curls, the tassels, the very distinctive religious attire, people kind of rocking back and forth as they pray at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. This is kind of we think about with Judaism, so the Orthodox conservatives, yet there's also progressive branches of Judaism. Think about Reformed Judaism, even over in Huntington and Charleston, West Virginia. We have Reformed Jewish temples. And in a few times, the rabbis for those temples have spoken here at UPike. I want to look particularly at Reform Judaism, because inside of Orthodox Judaism, of course, that's going to be your traditional approach, where homosexuality is going to be seen as immoral or immoral and is wrong. But inside of Reform Judaism, there is a ton of space and full inclusion for gay persons. So they will, gay people will feel very included, affirmed, and loved inside of Reform Judaism. So, but the challenge is, here's the challenge for Judaism. Unlike Christianity or even Islam, Islam and Christianity are what we call religions of conversion. So you will be asked to convert to being a Christian, right? Are you saved? Are you born again? Lead you in the sinner's prayer. And in Islam, you are asked to surrender to Allah, right? And there's a particular prayer that you will say, and so people can convert, right? Going from one religion to the next. But in Judaism, you really aren't converted into being Jewish. You're not going to be asked at an airport, do you want to become a Jewish? That's not how it works. People are born into this religious tradition. And because of that, if a person is born in a conservative Jewish home and they are gay, what happens when they want to come out? Are they going to lose their whole family? And what I've done is I put a link there to one gay man's struggle with being Orthodox, being a part of an Orthodox Jewish community, family, tradition. Do you hear kind of the anxiety rising as we think about all the forms of inclusion? And when we think about that, we think about the struggles, right? And particularly, unlike Islam, unlike Christianity, Judaism is very tied to one nation. Now, there are Jews all over the place, and the United States is the second largest Jewish country in the world. New York is the largest Jewish community in the United States, but there is a Jewish nation, the nation of Israel, right, in the Middle East is a Jewish nation, so that Jewish laws are a part of Israel's identity. So we have to ask the question, what's it like for gay people in Israel? And I have put an identity, or I've put a link down there to talk about gay Jews who are trying to work in and around religious loopholes to get married there in Israel. It's a fascinating little Vice story that you might find, that you might appreciate. So here are some Jewish resources: the Institute for Judaism, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, which is that branch of Judaism I said accepts and includes LGBTQ persons, Coming Home to Judaism itself, and here are some links for other Jewish organizations. Now, let's talk about the third largest world religion. So we've talked about Islam, number 2, Judaism is number 4. Now we come to number 3. You would think I'd put them in order, but let's talk about Hinduism. Hinduism is the third largest religion of the world, and we would be amiss if we wouldn't think about Hinduism and India. India is a Hindu nation, although the third most Muslims in the world live in India, although there are probably 100 million Christians that live in India. Of a country of 1.1 to 1.2 billion people, we know that over 800 million people in India are Hindus. So that would be almost twice the population of the United States who are just Hindus. So Hinduism, with the 850 million adherents there in India, is as diverse a religion and expression of religion and spirituality as any tradition on earth. And when you think Hinduism, I want you to instantly think wide diversity. There are thousands of different manifestations of God in Hinduism. Think of the little images, pictures, statues of the various gods. So you cannot say, it would be intellectually inappropriate to say all Hindus think, all Hindus say, all Hindus practice. It's just not true, right? It is widely varied, but it's important to realize that one of the things that impacts Hindus' view of human sexuality is the idea that they don't believe in just one life, right? Hindus believe in reincarnation, the idea of continuous rebirth and death, and that you are beginning to free yourself, free your spirit, right? Going on to the great moksha, the liberation. And with that, one of the things that you are working to be free of is human sexual passion and desire. So that will impact how we see, pride plus realities in Hinduism, which is important, though, to think about, because inside of Hinduism, there are some sacred texts, and inside the sacred text, there isn't distinguishing between heterosexual and homosexual realities. There's actually a third sex that is interesting to think about inside of Hinduism also. But inside the holy books of Hinduism, there is an idea of sexual acts that lead towards procreation, having children, and sexual acts that do not lead to procreation. So that can be an issue or a topic. But inside of Hinduism, you will find the religion, Hinduism is the most embracive religion when it comes to trans realities. So this is called the third sex. And from a book that I have linked here by Amra Das Wilhelm, it says Hinduism has acknowledged the third sex, or people who were by nature a combination of male and female. And such people were considered special, right? Not immoral, abnormal, hellbound, but special in many ways. They were thoroughly described in the Kama Sastra and were not punished under the rigid laws of Dharma Sastra. People of the third sex were described as homosexual, transgender, intersex persons. They were such by birth and consequently allowed to live their lives according to their own nature. So not judgment, seen as gifts of God, seen as special, and allowed to express themselves in the world. Gay males were never expected to marry women. Similarly, lesbian women were not forced to marry men, but were allowed to earn their livings independently. Even gay men, acknowledged in the Kama Sastra many thousands of years ago. And here you go, is a great picture of men who are identifying as women, so trans women, and beautifully celebrated, and no one thinks otherwise in India. It's just how it is, right? So we think today in the United States of legislators beating each other's brains out about trans swimmers and athletics and legislation, and here in India, because of its Hindu identity, is like, okay, great, this is wonderful, So here are some resources for Hindus when it comes to inclusion: a Gay and Lesbian Association, Hindu American Foundation. Let's talk about another world religion, Buddhism. And again, Buddhism is a global religion. You can think of places like Thailand. India is the birthplace of India is the birthplace of Buddhism. You think of places like China. You think of the East Asia. But in Buddhism, there are various schools of thought inside of Buddhism. Of course, we can't cover all of them, but I want to highlight, I will say this: all Buddhists are a part of the Eightfold Path, which is a kind of the guide towards enlightenment, which is the goal, right? And inside this Eightfold Path, there are 5 precepts, kind of these voluntary guidelines that in ways that Buddhists live out their morality, how to be a good person, right? These 5 precepts. In one of the precepts, the third one says this: aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I undertake the training to refrain from using sexual behavior in ways that are harmful to myself and to others. I will attempt to express my sexuality in ways that are beneficial and bring joy. Now, this is a wide open statement. And that when I say wide open, I mean it provides space for being interpreted in a variety of ways. So because this is such an open statement and is part of the core path of being moral, there is no consensus, Buddhist consensus, on sexual orientation or gender identity, and that you can find where Pride Plus students, community members, Buddhists could find space to be included, right? So up here on the right is a picture of the first same-sex wedding in Taiwan, 2 Buddhists being married and being celebrated. Here are a couple of resources inside of Buddhism: Queer Dharma and the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. But I think for most of us, probably in the class and of Eastern Kentucky or in the United States, the religion that we must really deal with is Christianity. It's the world's largest religion. About 1/3 of the globe identifies as Christian. And of course, the kind of the 4 branches of Christianity we can think about are Roman Catholics, which are over half of Christians are Roman Catholics. The second largest expression of Christianity is something called Orthodox Christians. So that could be like Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox. The third largest expression of Christianity, which is probably the one that most people are familiar with, is what we call Protestants. That's your Baptists, your Methodists, your Presbyterians, your Lutherans, your non-denominational. And then, of course, I would argue a fourth branch is Pentecostal Christians. But for many people, when I say there is a case to be made for the Bible to support same-sex relationships, some people are going to freak out. And ministers would say, it's very clear, there's no way, the Bible is absolutely crystal clear that, that God condemns same-sex relationships. And I would argue, yeah, I don't think so. I do think it's a complicated discussion. And I think there are some spaces that we have to pause and really, really, really listen to. Yet I have given you a link for a group of Christians, a group of scholars who fully make the biblical argument for why the Bible supports same-sex relationships. And you'll look here in this picture, here's a minister, right? A Christian minister who's leading worship. And you can see very much that the rainbow is a core part of identity, and sexuality is celebrated here. Okay, so this is a great video if you're interested in learning more about the Bible's support for same-sex relationships. Now, of course, there is the traditional view, the traditional approach, or the conservative approach to the Bible in saying that homosexuality is a sin. Here is a picture of I guess, a campaign or a protest in South Korea. Interestingly enough, South Korea is one of the largest, most dominant Christian countries in the world, sends tons of missionaries around the world every year. And here's a link to a video talking about the traditional views. And I don't want to go into that because I suspect that many of you have heard this before. But if you're interested, here's a traditional view of how to look at the Bible. But I would argue that if you find yourself today saying, you know what, the Bible's clear, same-sex relationships aren't aren't allowed, then I would encourage you to go back to the previous slide and to look at the argument that is opposite your view. Now, if you are of the space that says, you know what, I do believe the Bible supports same-sex relationships, then I would encourage you to look at this slide and and I'm not trying to change anyone's view. What I'm trying to say is, as an educated human being, we should be able to know the various sides of the argument, and also to understand the other perspectives so that you can also strengthen your own and have more confidence in your view, rather than, for me, for years, I was sheepishly, quietly holding these views privately. I needed more confidence, and I needed to know for sure this is what I believe, so I could be strong and confident and unashamed about who I am and what I believe. Now, for us in our talk is the idea, can you be gay in church, right? And there are some wonderful Christian denominations that say absolutely. They are called what's called welcoming and affirming churches. Places like, there are some Baptist churches, the American Baptist, Cooperative Baptist, Progressive Baptists. And every time you see a name in blue, there are links to these different religious traditions that you can click on and find out more about. There's Progressive Baptists, there's Evangelical Lutherans. Now, anytime you see these adjectives or qualifiers before the denominational name, like Progressive Baptist, it doesn't mean all Baptists. So if you go into a Southern Baptist church or an old regular Baptist church or a missionary or free will Baptist church, they're not affirming and welcoming, right? I don't mean that they're going to be mean, but they believe that being gay is a sin, right? So make sure that if you are searching out places that you follow the slide here and look at these qualifiers for what type of Baptist or what type of Lutheran, because a Missouri Synod Lutheran is not going to be affirming, but an Evangelical Lutheran, or what they call the ELCA, is. Presbyterian Church USA, open and affirming denomination. Now, again, slight difference. Presbyterian Church of America, not open and affirming. The United Church of Christ, what's called the UCC, wide open, one of the leading Christian denominations for inclusion and embrace of all persons. The Church of Christ, not so much. So the churches of Christ in our communities, not so much. The United Methodists, the Episcopal Church, and of course, the Disciples of Christ. I'm an Episcopalian, and our church in Prestonsburg, called St. James, has been open and affirming for many, many, many years. So now let's talk about inside of Roman Catholicism. A leading voice for the inclusion of gay persons inside of Roman Catholicism is a priest by the name of James Martin. You can find him on Twitter, Facebook, any social media. James Martin is exceptional. He's a great author, very usable book. So if you're interested in thinking about that. Now, how do you have the conversation with Christian people about human sexuality? Here's a guide I've linked up for you. And also kind of a off branch of Christianity. I don't exactly know where to put this next group, but they're called Universalist Unitarians or Unitarian Universalists. They're called UUs. We have a UU congregation in Huntington. We have a UU congregation in Lexington. Pretty much every major city in the world or in the country is going to have a UU church. And UUs are not only Christians. They're every religious group kind of joining together. So if you ever wondered and you said, gosh, why can't like Muslims and Hindus and Jews and Christians all get together? Congratulations, they do get together, and they're called UUs. And it's the belief that there is no one path that takes you, that all the paths have truth and value. So they're not explicitly Christian anymore, but when you go into a UU space, it has a feel of kind of like a church, and they are fully embracing of LGBTQ persons, advocate strongly for gay rights. The minister, Dr. Brian in Lexington of the UU Church in Lexington, is in a same-sex marriage. He and his husband have a great life, and he's great. And actually, at the end of the slide here, where you see the link for a discussion by UU minister, Dr. Brian gave us a talk in the fall via Zoom about human sexuality and spirituality. It's a great talk. He tells us a little bit more about the UU tradition, and then, of course, his understanding of human sexuality. So if you're interested, that's a great talk, and you can kind of skip through and find out what you want there. Now, the leading Christian voice for inclusion of LGBTQ plus persons is the Metropolitan Community Church, and their founder, Reverend Troy Perry. We almost had at UPike this year, although Reverend Perry is ill. He's 81 now, struggling with health. He is one of my heroes. He's an American pioneer. Reverend Troy Perry is the religious advocate. He started the first Pride Parade ever in the United States. He and his husband led the marriage equality fight in California, which was the first state to legalize same-sex marriages. Reverend Troy Perry was a minister, was gay, and could not be included in other spaces. So he made his own church, and it became the first church in the United States to be fully embracing of LGBTQ persons. It's called the Metropolitan Community Church. And for a long time in America, it was the only religious space that gay persons could be fully included. So although there are no MCC churches around, I do think there is a congregation in Lexington. But Reverend Troy Perry is a really cool guy, so I'd encourage you to check him out. I do want to put one point out about Christianity and human sexuality. The denomination that the university is associated with, because we are a Christian school, we are connected to the Presbyterian Church USA. And here is our church's stance. And you can see how it's informed, how UPike's informed by it. In 2015, the PC USA Church changed their marriage vows and defines marriage as a unique commitment between two people. Okay. Traditionally between a man and woman, but two people. So you see how that's fully inclusive and embracing. In 2010, the PC USA Church openly ordained and affirmed LGBTQ ministers. But that's at the discretion of each church, right? So some churches may say, hey, that's too far for us. We don't want to go there, but other churches can absolutely. There are transgender ministers inside the PCUSA. And if you're interested in that, of course, the denominational offices in Louisville and Covenant Network of Presbyterians and More Light Presbyterians are kind of the gay voice of the Presbyterian Church USA. Now, if you are discouraged by what's going on, particularly as you hear all this noise about transgender athletes, I really want you to be encouraged. Here are some things that are true about researchers tell us right now, that over half, 54% of Catholics in this country support marriage equality. Even more conservative, what we call evangelical Christians, actually think that 34% think that marriage equality should be a thing. And there are many different religious traditions now that are creating rituals and rites for transgender individuals. Even in the Black church, which has been one of the spaces where has not been very affirming or open, even inside the Black church. Now there is a push for inclusion of LGBTQ realities, and a third of Black Christians think that are open to marriage equality. Many religious communities are seeking to tackle and address and deal with the horrific pain of homeless LGBTQ youth. And of course, if you know anything about this community, the pain and loss of, and how many homeless gay youth there are, because they, youth comes out, gets kicked out of home or rejected, ends up on the streets, and then pretty quickly, sometimes within 48 hours, can be trafficked. So many faith groups addressing that. And even in the most conservative kind of angles of religion, think about like Orthodox Jews, even inside that world, people are beginning to slowly embrace and include. So these are resources here from the organization called GLAD. These are also hyperlinks you can click on. I'm just not sure why they're not blue. So here are lists of religious organizations that are affirming, from Muslims to Catholics to Episcopalians and Jewish. So you can click on those. Pew Research Center, which is the leading religious research institution in the country, they did a study on how religion and how religions and religious people look at gay persons. I've put a link here. It's fascinating. If you like numbers and research, you will eat that all up. But I didn't want to go there because the majority of people are like, check, please. So without further ado, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate you in exploring this topic. And again, if you have further questions, holler at me down there, Rob Musick Chaplain, Robert Musick at UPike, or see me on Twitter. So have a great day.